The evening rush at Blue Water Lounge was in full swing. The restaurant sparkled under soft lighting that bounced off crystal glasses and polished silverware. It was the kind of place where people came to be seen, where business deals were closed over $300 bottles of wine, and where the staff knew better than to be noticed unless needed. Zoe Williams moved between the tables with the grace of someone who had learned to navigate tight spaces while balancing heavy trays. At 28, she had the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of handling difficult customers with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her black uniform was pressed perfectly, her hair pulled back neatly, and her face showed nothing of the exhaustion that tugged at her body after being on her feet for 6 hours already. "Table 12 needs more water," whispered Miguel, one of the other waiters, as they passed each other. "And watch out, it's Harrison Reed's party." Zoe nodded, her expression unchanged, though her heart sank a little. Harrison Reed was well known among the staff at Blue Water, a 50-something real estate developer whose money had apparently never bought him manners. He owned half the luxury apartments in the downtown area and made sure everyone knew it. His reputation for treating servers like they were beneath him had earned him nicknames among the staff that would have shocked his business associates. 2 minutes, Zoe said to Miguel. She slipped into the kitchen, quickly refilled her water pitcher, and took a deep breath. 6 more hours until she could go home, change out of these uncomfortable shoes, and maybe practice for an hour before falling asleep. Her fingers itched for the keyboard, as they always did after a long shift of carrying plates instead of playing notes. The kitchen was a chaotic contrast to the calm dining room, chefs shouting orders, the sizzle of meat hitting hot pans, the clatter of dishes being plated and inspected under the watchful eye of Anton, the head chef. The heat was overwhelming after the carefully controlled temperature of the dining area. "Zoe, table 16's entrees are up," Anton called over the noise. "I'll be right back for those," she promised, already backing toward the door with her water pitcher. "Reed's table needs attention." Anton rolled his eyes in understanding. Everyone knew Reed's reputation. Zoe pushed through the swinging door and stepped back into the dining room, where soft jazz played and conversations were kept at a respectable volume, except for the corner where Reed's party sat. His laugh boomed across the restaurant, making heads turn briefly before politely looking away. Money bought you the right to be loud at Blue Water. As Zoe approached table 12, she took in the scene quickly. 8 people, mostly men in expensive suits, with 2 women who looked bored despite their smiles. Empty wine bottles, 3 already, and glasses that needed refilling. Harrison Reed sat at the head of the table, his back to the wall so he could survey his domain. He was heavyset, with a ruddy complexion that spoke of too many business dinners and too little exercise. His suit probably cost more than Zoe made in 2 months. "Good evening," Zoe said as she reached the table. "May I refill your water glasses?" Reed was in the middle of a story, something about outmaneuvering a competitor on a downtown development deal. He paused, looking up at Zoe with barely concealed annoyance at being interrupted. "Finally," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I was beginning to think we'd been forgotten back here." Zoe knew for a fact that their regular server, Diane, had been checking on them consistently, but Reed always found something to complain about. "I apologize for any delay, sir," Zoe said smoothly, beginning to pour water into the nearest glass. "Diane asked me to assist while she's preparing your wine selection." "Well, at least they sent someone," Reed said to his companions, who offered tight smiles. One of the men looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact with Zoe. "Though I'd prefer if my water didn't arrive when my glass has been empty for 10 minutes. Zoe continued pouring water for each guest, moving efficiently around the table. "Is there anything else I can bring for you while Diane is getting your wine? You can tell the kitchen that if my steak isn't perfectly medium rare this time, I'm sending it back again," Reed said. "Last time I was here, they apparently didn't understand what medium rare means." "I'll certainly pass that along," Zoe promised, though she knew Anton would roll his eyes. Reed always sent something back, no matter how perfectly it was prepared. As Zoe finished with the water and turned to leave, Reed's voice stopped her. "Hold on," he said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. "You're new, aren't you? I don't recognize you." Zoe turned back with a practiced smile. "I've been at Blue Water for 3 years, sir. I usually work the other section, but we're helping each other out tonight." Reed studied her face as if trying to place her. 3 years? As a waitress? He made the job title sound like something shameful. No ambition for something better? One of the women at the table shifted uncomfortably. Harrison, I'm just making conversation, Carol. Reed cut her off without looking away from Zoe. I'm curious. Young woman like you. Reasonably intelligent from the sound of it. 3 years carrying plates. You must have some other goals. Zoe maintained her professional smile, though she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Every instinct told her to walk away, but that would only make things worse. Reed was the type who enjoyed making people squirm, and showing any reaction would just encourage him. I'm working my way through school, sir, she said simply. This seemed to interest Reed. Oh? What are you studying? Let me guess, something practical like business or law? Music, Zoe replied, her voice steady despite the judgment she could already see forming in Reed's expression. Reed's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a laugh that drew attention from nearby tables again. Music? Well, that explains the career in food service. Planning a long future in aprons, then? A man to Reed's right, younger, with kinder eyes, attempted to change the subject. Harrison, about that waterfront property. In a minute, Tom. Reed waved him off. I'm getting to know our server here. So what instrument does a waitress play? Tambourine. Triangle. He chuckled at his own joke. Piano, Zoe answered, keeping her voice neutral. She'd had this conversation too many times to be baited into showing how much it bothered her. Piano, Reed repeated, glancing at his companions as if they should find this amusing. Well, I suppose that's better than the triangle. Classical, I hope, not that modern noise. Yes, classical primarily, Zoe confirmed, wondering how much longer this interrogation would last. Through the corner of her eye, she could see Anton at the kitchen door, watching with concern. She gave him a subtle nod to indicate she was handling it. Interesting, Reed said, though his tone suggested the opposite. And when you're not carrying plates and playing piano, what do you do for fun? Any boyfriend? Husband? The personal questions crossed a line, but before Zoe could respond, Diane appeared with a tray of fresh wine glasses and 2 bottles. Your Bordeaux, Mr. Reed, Diane announced with perfect timing. The 2018 you requested. Reed's attention shifted to the wine, giving Zoe a chance to step back. If you'll excuse me, she said politely. I need to check on my other tables. As she walked away, she heard Reed make a comment she couldn't quite catch, followed by laughter from some of his companions. She didn't need to hear it to know it wasn't complimentary. In the relative safety of the kitchen, Zoe took a moment to collect herself. 3 deep breaths just like before a recital. She felt Anton's hand on her shoulder. Reed being Reed? He asked, his Spanish accent more pronounced when he was concerned. Nothing I haven't heard before, Zoe assured him, straightening her shoulders. Table 16's entrees ready? Anton nodded, but his eyes were still worried. Don't let him get to you. Men like that, they feel big by making others feel small. I know, Zoe said, picking up the tray of perfectly plated meals. I just need to get through tonight. I have a practice room reserved at school tomorrow morning, and Professor Chen is letting me use the Steinway for an extra hour. The thought of the gleaming concert grand waiting for her tomorrow lightened her mood. The beautiful instrument with its perfect action and rich tone was worth dealing with a dozen Reeds. The night continued its busy pace. Zoe moved between her tables and occasionally helped with Reed's party when Diane was overwhelmed. Each time she approached table 12, Reed had some comment or question that walked the line between curiosity and condescension. Our piano player is having trouble with that baby grand, Zoe overheard him saying to his group as she cleared their appetizer plates. The restaurant's regular pianist was playing soft jazz standards on the small stage near the bar, hitting quite a few wrong notes. I suppose that's what happens when you hire based on looks rather than talent. The pianist, a middle-aged man named Vincent, who had played with several respected jazz quartets in his younger days, was doing no such thing. His playing was, as always, flawless and tasteful, but Reed seemed determined to find fault with everything and everyone. As the main courses arrived, Reed's criticism turned to the food. His steak was indeed perfectly medium rare. Zoe had checked it herself before bringing it out, but he insisted it was overcooked. The asparagus was too firm. The wine wasn't breathing properly. The lighting was too dim to properly see the food. Diane handled it all with the patience of a saint, but Zoe could see the strain around her colleague's eyes. When Diane disappeared into the wine cellar to fetch yet another bottle to replace the one Reed had decided was corked, it wasn't. Zoe stepped in to check if anything else was needed. Actually, Reed said, looking up at her with an expression that made Zoe instantly wary, I've been thinking about what you said earlier. A waitress who plays classical piano. That's quite unusual. Not really, Zoe replied evenly. Many musicians work in restaurants while they study. Reed's eyes shifted to the baby grand piano on the small stage. Vincent had finished his set and was taking a break, leaving the instrument momentarily unattended. You know, Reed said, a slow smile spreading across his face that didn't reach his eyes. I'm having trouble believing a waitress could be a serious pianist. It seems like the kind of thing someone would say to sound interesting. Zoe said nothing, waiting for whatever was coming next. That piano over there is just sitting empty, Reed continued, his voice getting louder. Why don't you show us what you can do? The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening progressed. Several tables had emptied, leaving behind wine-stained tablecloths and generous tips. The soft lighting seemed to dim further, creating pools of golden warmth around the remaining diners. But Harrison Reed's voice cut through this peaceful atmosphere like a knife. Well, Reed pressed, leaning back in his chair and gesturing toward the empty piano. You said you play classical piano. Here's a piano. Show us. Zoe stood very still, the empty bread basket she'd been about to take back to the kitchen still in her hands. She could feel eyes turning toward her, not just from Reed's table but from nearby diners who had overheard his challenge. Mr. Reed, she began carefully, I'm working right now. I don't think— Oh, come on, Reed interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. Don't tell me you were making it up. Surely the restaurant can spare you for one song. He turned to his companions with a smirk. Unless, of course, you can't actually play. One of the women at the table, Carol, Zoe remembered, looked uncomfortable. Harrison, leave the poor girl alone. She's trying to do her job. And I'm trying to encourage the arts, Reed replied with exaggerated innocence. If she's studying music, she should welcome an audience. Zoe spotted David Chen, the restaurant manager, emerging from his office near the entrance. He'd clearly heard the commotion and was coming to intervene. David was good that way. He didn't tolerate customers harassing his staff, even wealthy customers like Harrison Reed. But something inside Zoe shifted. She'd spent her entire life being underestimated. Growing up in a neighborhood where music lessons were considered a luxury, where her mother had worked extra shifts as a nurse to pay for her first upright piano, where teachers had expressed surprise at her talent, as if people from her background weren't supposed to play Chopin or Debussy. She'd fought too hard to get where she was to back down now. Before David could reach them, Zoe placed the bread basket on an empty table and straightened her shoulders. Actually, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, I would be happy to play something, if it's all right with management. David stopped in his tracks, concern visible on his face. Zoe gave him a small nod to indicate she knew what she was doing. After a moment's hesitation, he returned the nod and stepped back, though he remained nearby, watching carefully. Well, Reed exclaimed, clearly surprised, but quickly covering it with a triumphant smile. This is a pleasant surprise. Let's see what our waitress can do. He emphasized the word waitress in a way that made it clear what he expected. Something simple, probably fumbling, good for a laugh at best. The perfect entertainment for his business associates. Zoe walked across the restaurant floor, aware of the eyes following her. She passed Vincent, the regular pianist who was returning from his break. You okay? He whispered, concern in his eyes. I got this, she assured him. Just one piece. Vincent nodded and stepped aside, giving her an encouraging smile. Show him what you got, girl. As Zoe approached the baby grand piano, she felt a familiar calm settling over her. This wasn't the magnificent Steinway in the recital hall at school, but it was well maintained. She'd heard Vincent play it enough to know its voice. The polished black surface reflected the soft lights overhead, and the bench waited like an old friend. She sat down, adjusting the height with the ease of someone who had done so countless times before. Her work shoes weren't ideal for pedaling, but they would do. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, gathering herself, choosing her piece. From Reed's table came a theatrical whisper, clearly meant to be heard. $10 says she plays chopsticks. Scattered, nervous laughter followed. Zoe didn't turn around. Instead, she placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. She took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor flowed from her fingers, gentle at first, questioning, like the beginning of a story told in hushed tones. The piece was challenging, one she had been perfecting for months under Professor Levine's watchful eye. It required not just technical skill but emotional depth, the ability to guide listeners through its complex emotional landscape. As the initial theme developed, Zoe's body relaxed into the familiar movements. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and grace, building the tension of the piece note by note. The conversation in the restaurant died away completely. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Zoe didn't look up. She didn't need to see Reed's face or the reactions of the other diners. The piano was speaking for her now, telling them everything they needed to know. As the piece progressed, growing more complex and passionate, she gave herself over to it completely. The technical challenges of the middle section, the rapid runs, the delicate ornamentations, passed beneath her fingers with the fluidity that came from hundreds of hours of practice. Each note was clear, purposeful, alive. The music filled the space, bouncing off the high ceilings and wrapping around the silent tables. When she reached the stormy crescendo, her hands moved with controlled power, drawing from the piano a sound much bigger than anyone would have expected from the petite woman in a server's uniform. The emotional intensity of the piece was visible in her body now, her face no longer the careful mask of a waitress trying to please difficult customers, but alive with the passion of an artist lost in creation. And then came the final section, where the melody returned transformed, speaking of both struggle and triumph. Zoe's fingers danced through the complex closing passages, bringing the musical narrative to its conclusion with precision and heart. The final chords resonated through the restaurant, hanging in the air for several seconds after her hands had lifted from the keys. Then, silence. Complete, absolute silence. Zoe finally looked up, her breathing slightly elevated from the exertion. The restaurant was frozen in a tableau of stunned faces. At a table near the front, an elderly man sat with tears streaming unashamedly down his wrinkled cheeks. A young couple by the window held hands across their table, their half-eaten desserts forgotten. Vincent stood at the edge of the stage, shaking his head in wonder. And at table 12, Harrison Reed sat perfectly still, his mouth slightly open. The smug expression wiped completely from his face. The silence broke with a sudden burst of applause. It started with a single person, Carol from Reed's table, and spread like wildfire through the restaurant. People were standing now, clapping enthusiastically, some calling out "Bravo!" and other appreciative exclamations. Zoe rose from the bench and gave a small, graceful bow, the kind she had been taught in her performance classes. Her heart was racing, but not from nervousness. This feeling, the rush of connection with an audience through music, was why she practiced until her fingers ached, why she took on double shifts to pay for school, why she endured people like Harrison Reed. As she stepped down from the small stage, David approached her with a wide smile. "That was incredible, Zoe," he said quietly, patting her shoulder. "Take a few minutes if you need them." "I'm fine," she assured him, though she was grateful for the offer. "I should get back to my tables." Vincent caught her eye as she passed and gave her a thumbs up. "Girl, you've been holding out on me," he said with a grin. "We should do a duet sometime." Zoe laughed, feeling lighter than she had all evening. "Anytime, Vincent." As she made her way back across the restaurant floor, diners stopped her to offer compliments and ask questions. She answered politely but briefly, conscious that she still had jobs to do. The restaurant might have paused for Chopin, but the evening's work wasn't over. When she finally approached Reed's table again, the atmosphere had changed completely. The loud boasting and forced laughter had vanished. In their place was a strange, awkward silence. Reed's companions were looking at her with new eyes, respect, curiosity, and in some cases embarrassment over their earlier behavior. Reed himself seemed unable to meet her gaze. He stared into his wine glass as if it contained answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. "Would anyone like coffee or dessert?" Zoe asked professionally, as if nothing unusual had happened. Carol was the first to respond. "That was absolutely beautiful," she said warmly. "Where did you study?" Before Zoe could answer, one of the men, Tom, the one who had tried earlier to steer the conversation away from Reed's rudeness, pulled out his phone. "Wait a minute," he said, looking at his screen and then up at Zoe with widening eyes. "Are you Zoe Williams?" "The Zoe Williams who won the regional young artist competition last spring." Zoe nodded, feeling a small flush of pride. "Yes, that was me." "I was there," Tom said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "My daughter is a violinist. She was in the strings category. Your Beethoven was extraordinary. She talked about your performance for weeks." "Thank you," Zoe said sincerely. "That means a lot to me." The table had erupted into murmurs of interest and surprise. Everyone except Reed, who continued to stare into his wine glass, his ruddy face now tinged with a different kind of redness. "So you're not just a student," another man at the table clarified. "You're actually a recognized pianist." "I'm both," Zoe corrected gently. "I'm completing my master's degree at the conservatory while working here." The competition had a small cash prize that helped with tuition, but restaurant work pays the bills. Carol shook her head in admiration. "All those hours of practice on top of working here, I don't know how you do it." "When you love something," Zoe replied simply, "you find a way." It was at this moment that Reed finally looked up from his wine glass. His expression was difficult to read, a complex mixture of embarrassment, surprise, and something that might have been grudging respect. "I believe," he said, his voice noticeably quieter than before, "that we're ready for the check." The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Zoe. After bringing the check to Reed's table, she returned to her regular duties, but things had changed. Customers from other tables stopped her to compliment her playing. A couple celebrating their anniversary asked if she took private bookings. Vincent, the regular pianist, insisted on getting her number so they could discuss possible duets for the restaurant's weekend brunch service. Through it all, Zoe maintained her professional demeanor, though inside she was glowing. Music had always been her escape, her passion, her true voice. Tonight it had also become her shield and her vindication. Reed's party paid and left shortly after her performance. The man named Tom had pressed a business card into her hand with genuine warmth, mentioning that his daughter would be thrilled to hear he'd met Zoe. Carol had left an extra tip with a note that simply said, "Thank you for the beautiful music." Reed himself had signed. The credit card slipped without making eye contact, leaving a larger tip than usual but saying nothing directly to Zoe. By midnight, the restaurant was empty except for staff. Zoe helped with the closing duties, refilling salt shakers, wiping down menus, folding napkins for tomorrow's service. Her feet ached from hours of standing, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in months. "That was quite a show you put on," David said, as he counted out the night's tips. "I had no idea you could play like that." Zoe shrugged, slightly embarrassed by the attention. "I don't usually mention it unless someone asks directly." "Well, after tonight, everyone's going to ask," David replied with a grin. Half the staff was peeking from the kitchen. "Anton said he's never seen Reed speechless before, and he's been serving him for years." "It wasn't about shutting him up," Zoe said, though part of her had enjoyed that aspect. "It was just, I don't know. I got tired of being underestimated." David nodded, understanding. "You've got real talent, Zoe. Makes me wonder what other secrets my staff is hiding. Maybe Diane is secretly a Broadway dancer, and Miguel is a champion chess player." Zoe laughed, finishing the last stack of napkins. "You never know." "Seriously, though," David continued, his tone growing more thoughtful, "have you thought about what happens after graduation? Will you stay in the city? Try for orchestra positions?" "I'm hoping to get into the Young Artist program at the Symphony," Zoe admitted. "Applications are due next month. The competition is fierce, but if I got in, it would open a lot of doors." "Well, based on what I heard tonight, they'd be lucky to have you," David said sincerely. He handed her an envelope with her share of the night's tips. "Now go home and get some rest. I have a feeling you might be a bit of a local celebrity tomorrow." Zoe smiled at the idea, though she doubted anything would really change. One impressive performance in a restaurant wasn't going to transform her life overnight. Still, as she walked to the bus stop in the cool night air, she felt a spark of hope that had been missing lately. She'd stood her ground tonight. She'd shown what she could do. The apartment was dark when she arrived home. Her roommate, Tanya, a law student who kept even more grueling hours than Zoe, was already asleep. Zoe moved quietly through the small living space, dropping her keys in the bowl by the door and slipping off her uncomfortable work shoes with a sigh of relief. Despite the lateness of the hour and her physical exhaustion, she wasn't ready to sleep. The music was still flowing through her veins, the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers still fresh. She went to the small digital piano in the corner of the living room. Not the grand she dreamed of owning someday, but a decent instrument with weighted keys that allowed her to practice at home with headphones. She slipped the headphones on and began to play quietly. Working through a section of the Rachmaninoff piece she was preparing for her end-of-term recital. Her muscles remembered what to do even as her tired mind began to drift. This was her real life. Not the serving trays and water pitchers, but the music that had been her companion since childhood. The next morning came too early. Zoe's alarm jolted her awake at 6, giving her just enough time to get ready for her 7:30 a.m. practice session at the conservatory. She had managed to reserve one of the better practice rooms with an actual Steinway, a rare luxury that students competed fiercely for. As she hurried through her morning routine, Tanya emerged from her room looking as tired as Zoe felt. "Late night?" Tanya asked, making a beeline for the coffee maker. "You could say that," Zoe replied, quickly recounting the events at the restaurant while gathering her sheet music and notebooks. Tanya's eyes widened as Zoe described Reed's challenge and her response. "You actually did it?" Played in front of the whole restaurant. "Zoe, that's amazing." Zoe felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "It just happened. I didn't really think about it." "Well, it sounds like you shut that rich jerk up good," Tanya said with satisfaction. "I wish I could have seen his face." "It was pretty priceless," Zoe admitted, allowing herself a small smile at the memory. "Anyway, I've got to run. Professor Levine is letting me use her teaching studio for extra practice today. Go get him." "Maestro," Tanya called as Zoe headed for the door. The conservatory building was quiet at this early hour, most students preferring afternoon or evening practice slots. Zoe liked the morning quiet, the way sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the historic building, the feeling of possibility that came with a new day. She was surprised to find Professor Levine already in her studio when she arrived. The older woman rarely came in before her first class at 9. "Ah, Zoe, good," Professor Levine said, looking up from her desk. "I was hoping to catch you." Zoe felt a flicker of concern. Had she done something wrong? Was there a problem with her scholarship again? "Is everything okay?" she asked, setting down her bag. Professor Levine adjusted her reading glasses and regarded Zoe with an expression that was difficult to read. "I received a rather interesting phone call this morning," she said, "from a man named Thomas Bradford. He says he heard you play last night at Blue Water Lounge." Zoe blinked in surprise. Tom from Reed's table had called her professor? Yes, I did play there. It wasn't planned." Professor Levine's serious expression softened into a rare smile. "So I gathered. Mr. Bradford was quite effusive in his praise. He also happens to sit on the board of the Symphony's Young Artists program." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Zoe reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. "He's on the board? I didn't know that." "Yes, and apparently he was very impressed," Professor Levine continued. "He wanted to know more about your background and training. I told him about your scholarship, your progress here, the competitions you've won." Zoe's heart was pounding now. The Young Artist program was her dream, a paid position working with the symphony, receiving mentoring from world-class musicians, performing in selected concerts. It could launch a real career. And Tom, Mr. Bradford, was on the board? What did he say?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Professor Levine removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully on the edge of her blouse. "He said they're still accepting applications for next season, and that he would very much like to see yours in the pile. He also mentioned something about you putting a certain Harrison Reed in his place, though he was rather vague about the details." Her eyes twinkled with curiosity. "Perhaps you'd care to elaborate on that part?" Zoe sank into the chair, trying to absorb what she was hearing. "It's a long story," she said faintly. "Well, I have 20 minutes before my first student arrives," Professor Levine replied, settling back in her chair. "And I do love a good story, especially one that involves my star pupil impressing a symphony board member." So Zoe told her everything, about Reed's rude behavior, his challenge, her decision to play the Chopin, and the stunned reaction that followed. As she spoke, she realized how surreal it all seemed in the light of day, like something from a movie rather than her real life. When she finished, Professor Levine nodded slowly. Sometimes, Zoe, opportunities come from the most unexpected places. Even from unpleasant encounters with arrogant men. I still can't believe Mr. Bradford called you, Zoe said, shaking her head in wonder. Well, he did more than call, Professor Levine said, reaching into her desk drawer and withdrawing an envelope. He dropped this off personally on his way to work this morning. Asked me to give it to you. She handed the envelope to Zoe, who took it with fingers that trembled slightly. Inside was a formal letter on symphony letterhead. Dear Ms. Williams, it read. Following our encounter last evening at Blue Water Lounge, I spoke with several of my colleagues on the symphony board about your remarkable talent. We would like to invite you to perform at our annual fundraising gala next month as a special guest artist. This would be a paid engagement and an opportunity to meet many influential supporters of our organization. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to discuss details. Sincerely, Thomas Bradford, Board of Directors. Zoe looked up, unable to speak. I take it this is good news? Professor Levine asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. The Symphony Fundraising Gala, Zoe whispered. They want me to play at the gala. Professor, this is huge. Indeed it is, Professor Levine agreed. The gala is attended by everyone who's anyone in the city's music scene. And if you impress them there... She didn't need to finish the thought. All because I stood up to a rude customer, Zoe said. Still trying to process it all. Professor Levine's expression grew more serious. No, Zoe. All because you've spent years honing your talent and didn't let anyone tell you what you couldn't do. Mr. Reed may have provided the stage, but you're the one who was ready to perform when the opportunity arose. Zoe carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, her mind racing with possibilities and questions. What would she play? What would she wear? How would she balance preparation for such an important performance with her classes and work schedule? But beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper feeling, a sense that something fundamental had shifted, that a door had opened that couldn't be closed again. Now, Professor Levine said, checking her watch, I believe you had a practice session scheduled. The Rachmaninoff still needs work, especially the third movement, and it seems you now have even more reason to perfect it. Zoe nodded, tucking the envelope carefully into her bag. As she settled herself at the Steinway and placed her hands on the keys, she felt different somehow, stronger, more certain. The same fingers that had carried plates last night might someday soon be carrying her dreams. She began to play. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind for Zoe. Between her classes, practice sessions, shifts at Blue Water, and now preparations for the Symphony Gala, she barely had time to breathe, let alone sleep. She had called Mr. Bradford's office the same day she received his letter, and within 48 hours, she had met with the gala committee to discuss her performance. They had requested 2 pieces, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, which Mr. Bradford had heard at the restaurant, and another selection of her choice. After consulting with Professor Levine, Zoe had decided on Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a powerful, technically demanding piece that would showcase a different aspect of her abilities. Now, with just 3 days until the gala, Zoe was practicing every spare moment. She had even cut back her hours at Blue Water, something she'd never done before, not even during finals. You look like you haven't slept in a month, Tanya commented as Zoe shuffled into the kitchen on Thursday morning. Coffee? Please, Zoe said, gratefully accepting the mug Tanya offered. I was up until 2 working on the Rachmaninoff. Tanya leaned against the counter, studying her roommate with concern. You know, most people would be excited about playing at a fancy gala. You look terrified. Zoe took a long sip of coffee before responding. I am excited. I'm also terrified. Do you know who goes to these things? The mayor, the university president, the director of the symphony. People who could make or break my career. And you'll blow them all away, Tanya said confidently, just like you did with that Reed guy. Zoe wished she shared her friend's certainty. The truth was she hadn't heard anything from or about Harrison Reed since that night at the restaurant. Part of her had expected some kind of fallout, a complaint to the manager maybe, or at least bad reviews online. But there had been nothing. It was as if the entire incident had been a strange dream, remembered only by Zoe and her co-workers. By the way, Tanya said, interrupting Zoe's thoughts, that package came for you yesterday while you were at school. I put it on the coffee table. Zoe looked over to see a large, flat rectangular box tied with a silver ribbon sitting on their second-hand coffee table. What is it? Tanya shrugged. No idea. The delivery guy just said it needed a signature. Curious, Zoe set down her coffee and went to examine the package. There was a small card attached to the ribbon, with her name printed in elegant script. She opened it. For your performance on Saturday, the card read. Wear it with pride. You've earned it. Carol Winters. Carol, the woman from Reed's table that night. Zoe's fingers trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a stunning concert dress in deep emerald green. Zoe gasped, carefully lifting it from the box. The fabric was luxurious silk, with delicate beading along the bodice and a flowing skirt perfect for a pianist. Full enough for movement, but not so full as to be cumbersome at the bench. Oh my God, Tanya breathed, coming to stand beside Zoe. That's gorgeous. And it looks expensive. Really expensive. Zoe checked for a tag or label but found none. This was no off-the-rack dress. It had been made to order. But how had Carol known her size? As if reading her mind, Tanya pointed to a folded note tucked into the tissue paper. Zoe set the dress carefully across the back of the couch and opened the note. Dear Zoe, it read, I hope you don't mind, but I spoke with your manager David to get your size. I've been on the Symphony Guild for 10 years, and I know how important the right dress can be for a debut performance. Tom told me you'll be playing at the gala, and I couldn't be more thrilled. Your talent deserves to be recognized. I look forward to seeing you shine on Saturday. Warmest regards, Carol. Wow, Tanya said when Zoe showed her the note. From the wife of the guy who was rude to you? That's unexpected. She wasn't his wife, Zoe clarified. Just someone at his table. She was actually nice. She tried to get him to stop bothering me. Well, she certainly seems to be in your corner now, Tanya said, running a finger over the beadwork on the dress. You know a dress like this would cost thousands, right? Zoe nodded, feeling overwhelmed. The most expensive dress she owned had cost $120 on clearance, and she'd agonized over spending that much. This was beyond anything she could have afforded for the gala. She had been planning to wear the simple black dress she used for student recitals, hoping its plainness would go unnoticed. You have to try it on, Tanya insisted, already reaching for the dress again. 20 minutes later, Zoe stood in front of the full-length mirror on the back of their bathroom door, hardly recognizing herself. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for her body. The color made her eyes look more green than brown, and the cut was elegant without being overly revealing, perfect for a classical performance. You look like you belong on that stage, Tanya said, a touch of awe in her voice. Zoe turned slightly, watching how the fabric caught the light. For the first time since receiving Mr. Bradford's invitation, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of confidence. Maybe she did belong there among those influential people, playing the music she loved. Now you just need shoes, Tanya added pragmatically. Zoe laughed, the tension of the past weeks easing slightly, one miracle at a time. Saturday evening arrived all too quickly. Zoe spent the morning practicing one last time in Professor Levine's studio, then went home to prepare. Tanya helped her with her hair, styling it in an elegant updo that complemented the dress without being fussy. A touch of makeup, a pair of simple gold earrings borrowed from Tanya, and the new shoes she'd found on sale completed the transformation. You don't look like a waitress anymore, Tanya said as Zoe gathered her purse and the small folder containing her sheet music. I never was just a waitress, Zoe replied with a smile. The gala was being held at the Grand Hotel downtown, its ballroom transformed into a concert space for the evening. A sleek black limousine, another surprise from Carol, picked Zoe up at 6, giving her time to arrive, settle her nerves, and do a quick sound check before guests began to arrive at 7. As the car pulled up to the hotel entrance, Zoe took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. This was it, the biggest performance of her life so far. The moment that could open doors she had only dreamed of walking through. The hotel staff directed her to a small green room behind the stage where she found Mr. Bradford waiting for her. Zoe, you look wonderful, he greeted her warmly, taking her hands in his. How are you feeling? Nervous? Terrified, she admitted with a shaky laugh. Good, he said, surprising her. A little stage fright keeps us sharp. I've been on that board for 15 years, and I can tell you that every great artist I've ever met gets nervous before a performance. It's the ones who aren't scared that worry me. His words were oddly comforting. Zoe set her music on the small table and carefully smoothed the skirt of her dress. "That's a beautiful gown," Mr. Bradford commented. "It reminds me of what my daughter wore for her first major recital. Green is a powerful color on stage, stands out without being flashy." "It was a gift," Zoe said. "From Carol Winters? I believe she was at your table that night at Blue Water." Mr. Bradford's face lit with recognition. "Ah, yes. Carol is a dear friend and a passionate supporter of the arts. She has an eye for talent." A young man with a headset poked his head into the room. "Mr. Bradford, the guests are arriving and Mrs. Hayes is asking for you." "Duty calls," Mr. Bradford said with a smile. "I'll let you prepare in peace. You're on after the welcoming speeches. About 30 minutes from now. Break a leg, Zoe. I know you'll be magnificent." Left alone, Zoe went through her pre-performance routine, stretching her fingers, going through difficult passages in her mind, taking slow, deep breaths to center herself. She could hear the murmur of voices growing louder in the ballroom, the gentle clinking of glasses, the subtle sounds of wealth and influence gathering. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Probably the stage manager, coming to give her a 5-minute warning. "Come in," she called. The door opened, but it wasn't the stage manager. It was Harrison Reed. Zoe froze, her hands still poised above the imaginary keyboard in her lap. Reed looked different from the night at the restaurant. His expensive suit was the same, but his demeanor had changed. Gone was the loud, overbearing presence that had dominated the dining room. He seemed almost hesitant. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "I'm preparing for my performance," she replied, finding her voice. "I go on in about 20 minutes. Reed nodded, stepping just inside the door but leaving it open as if to reassure her this wasn't a confrontation. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to speak with you before the event." Zoe said nothing, waiting. Part of her was curious about what could possibly bring this man to seek her out. Another part was wary, remembering his dismissive attitude and cutting remarks. "I owe you an apology," Reed said finally, the words seeming to come with difficulty. "My behavior at the restaurant was inexcusable. I was rude, condescending, and, frankly, I was a complete ass." The blunt admission surprised a small smile from Zoe. "Yes, you were." A flash of something. Irritation? Amusement? Crossed Reed's face before he nodded. "I deserved that. Why are you here, Mr. Reed?" Zoe asked directly. "Surely not just to apologize. You could have sent a note to the restaurant." Reed's hand went to his pocket, then returned to his side, a nervous gesture she wouldn't have expected from such a self-assured man. "Tom Bradford is an old friend," he said. "When he told me you'd be performing tonight, I realized I had a chance to make amends. And perhaps to explain myself, though there's really no good explanation for bad manners." "No," Zoe agreed. "There isn't." "The truth is," Reed continued, "I've been going through a difficult time personally. My wife left me 6 months ago, and I've been, well, taking it out on the wrong people. That's not an excuse. Just the sad reality." Zoe was silent for a moment, absorbing this unexpected glimpse into the man's personal life. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it did make him seem more human. "Thank you for the apology," she said finally. "I accept it." Reed looked relieved, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Thank you. And if I may say so, you play beautifully. It was a privilege to hear you that night, even if I didn't show it properly." There was sincerity in his voice that hadn't been there before. Zoe found herself nodding. "I appreciate that." "I'll leave you to prepare now," Reed said, moving back toward the door. "Good luck tonight, Miss Williams, though I doubt you'll need it." As he reached the doorway, he turned back. "Oh, and one more thing. Tom mentioned you're applying for the Young Artist program?" "Yes," Zoe confirmed, wondering where this was going. "I'm on the funding committee for that program," Reed said. "We've just doubled the stipend for next season's participants. Thought you might like to know." With a small nod, he was gone, leaving Zoe to wonder about the complex man behind the rude exterior she had encountered. Before she could ponder it further, the stage manager appeared. 5 minutes, Ms. Williams," he said briskly. "Are you ready?" Zoe took a deep breath, gathering her music and her courage. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." As she stepped toward the door that would lead her to the stage, she realized it was true. She was ready, not just for tonight's performance, but for whatever came next. The journey from that tense moment in the restaurant to this elegant ballroom had been short in time but immeasurable in significance. Tonight, she would play not as a waitress with a hidden talent, but as herself, Zoe Williams, pianist. And that made all the difference. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel had been transformed for the evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in white linen. Flower arrangements in deep blues and purples decorated the center of each table. At the front of the room stood a magnificent concert grand piano, not the baby grand from Blue Water, but a full-size Steinway that gleamed under the spotlight. From her position just off stage, Zoe could see the room filling with guests in formal attire. Women in elegant gowns and men in tuxedos mingled, champagne glasses in hand. She recognized a few faces from newspaper photos: the mayor, several city council members, the president of the university. The wealthy and powerful of the city gathered to support the symphony and tonight to hear her play. The thought made her palms sweat. She wiped them discreetly on a handkerchief tucked in her small clutch purse. The stage manager stood nearby, watching the proceedings with the calm efficiency of someone who had orchestrated hundreds of such events. "The president of the symphony board is about to welcome everyone," he told Zoe quietly. "Then Mr. Bradford will introduce you. When you hear your name, that's your cue." Zoe nodded, her mouth too dry for speech. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself as Professor Levine had taught her. The noise of the crowd, the pressure of the moment, the lingering surprise of Reed's apology. She let it all fall away until there was nothing but the music waiting in her mind and fingertips. On stage, an elegant older woman with silver hair approached the microphone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Symphony's annual fundraising gala. I'm Elizabeth Hayes, president of the Symphony Board." As Mrs. Hayes spoke about the Symphony's achievements over the past year and plans for the coming season, Zoe caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. David, her manager from Blue Water, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, seated at a table near the back. The restaurant must have purchased a table to support the event. Vincent, the regular pianist, was with him, giving Zoe a thumbs up when he spotted her peeking from backstage. Several of her professors from the conservatory sat at another table, Professor Levine among them, elegant in a simple black dress, and there, at a table near the front, sat Harrison Reed. Next to him was Carol, beautiful in a midnight blue gown, and Tom Bradford's wife, a petite woman with kind eyes. Reed seemed different in this setting, less domineering, more subdued. As Zoe watched, Carol leaned over to say something to him, and he nodded in response, a small smile crossing his face. "And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Thomas Bradford, chair of our Young Artists Committee, who has a special presentation for us tonight," Mrs. Hayes was saying. Bringing Zoe's attention back to the stage, Mr. Bradford approached the microphone with the confident stride of someone accustomed to public speaking. "Thank you, Elizabeth. As many of you know, discovering and nurturing new talent is one of the Symphony's most important missions. Our Young Artists program has launched dozens of successful careers over the past 20 years. Tonight we have a remarkable young pianist to share with you, someone I had the good fortune to discover in the most unexpected of settings." He went on to briefly recount the story of that night at Blue Water, though he tactfully omitted Reed's rudeness, describing it merely as an impromptu challenge that led to an extraordinary performance. Several people in the audience chuckled, and Zoe noticed Reed dipping his head slightly, whether in embarrassment or acknowledgement she couldn't tell. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce a rising star in our city's musical firmament, Ms. Zoe Williams." Applause filled the room as Zoe took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter than she expected, making it difficult to see beyond the first few tables. She crossed to the piano with measured steps, careful not to rush despite her racing heart. The emerald dress caught the light as she moved, its subtle beating creating a gentle shimmer. She stopped beside the piano and gave a graceful bow just as she'd practiced. The applause continued for several seconds before fading to an expectant silence. Zoe settled herself on the bench, adjusting it slightly, then placing her hands in her lap for a moment of centering. She had decided to play the Chopin first, the piece that had started this journey. As her fingers touched the keys and the opening notes filled the room, she felt a sense of coming full circle. This was the same music she had played in defiance of Reed's challenge, but tonight it carried a different energy, not anger or pride, but joy and invitation. The Steinway responded to her touch with a richness that elevated her playing. Each note had a depth and resonance that inspired her to find new nuances in the familiar piece. As the music built toward its climactic passages, Zoe felt herself disappearing into it, the audience fading from her awareness until there was nothing but the conversation between her hands and the piano. When the final notes of the ballade faded away, there was a moment of complete silence before the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Zoe rose and bowed again, a genuine smile spreading across her face as she saw people rising to their feet. A standing ovation after her first piece, it was more than she had dared to hope for. As the applause continued, she caught sight of Professor Levine nodding in approval, David and the Blue Water staff clapping with obvious pride, and Carol beaming as she applauded. Next to Carol, Reed was standing too, his face showing something that looked like respect. When the audience finally settled, Zoe returned to the bench for her second piece, the Rachmaninoff Prelude. This was a bolder choice with its thundering bass notes and technical challenges, but she felt confident now. The terror that had gripped her backstage had transformed into the electric energy that fueled her best performances. The Prelude showcased a different side of her musicality, power, and precision, rather than the emotional subtlety of the Chopin. Her hands moved with assured skill through the demanding passages, drawing gasps from the audience during particularly impressive runs. When she struck the final chord, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Another standing ovation, this one even more enthusiastic than the first. Zoe stood, flushed with exhilaration, and bowed deeply. As she straightened, she saw Mr. Bradford approaching with a bouquet of white roses. He handed them to her with a warm smile before turning to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Zoe Williams," he announced, leading another round of applause. When it quieted, he continued, "What an extraordinary talent we've witnessed tonight. And I'm delighted to announce that the Symphony's Young Artists Committee has unanimously decided to offer Ms. Williams a place in next season's program." Zoe's breath caught in her throat. They were announcing it now? She hadn't even formally applied yet. Furthermore, Mr. Bradford went on, thanks to the generosity of several donors, including Mr. Harrison Reed, who has substantially increased his annual contribution to the program, we are able to offer Ms. Williams a special scholarship that will allow her to focus exclusively on her music in the coming year, without the distractions of outside employment. Zoe's eyes found Reed in the audience. He gave her a small nod, not the condescending gesture from their first encounter, but one of acknowledgement between equals. She returned it, a wordless exchange that somehow closed the circle of their unusual connection. The reception that followed the performance passed in a blur for Zoe. She was surrounded by well-wishers, symphony patrons eager to meet the new discovery, conservatory faculty offering congratulations, and her friends from Blue Water bubbling with pride and excitement. "I knew you were good," David told her, "but that was something else entirely. You're going to need a bigger stage than our little restaurant." "You'll always have a table at Blue Water," Vincent added with a grin, "though I'm guessing you won't be carrying trays anymore." Professor Levine made her way through the crowd, enveloping Zoe in a rare hug. "Magnificent," she said simply. "You've made me very proud tonight." "I couldn't have done it without your guidance," Zoe replied honestly. "Nonsense," Professor Levine dismissed the comment with a wave of her hand. "The talent was always yours. I just helped you shape it." She glanced over Zoe's shoulder. "And I believe you have more admirers waiting to speak with you." Zoe turned to find Carol approaching, flanked by Tom Bradford and Harrison Reed. "You were absolutely stunning," Carol said warmly, taking both of Zoe's hands in hers. "The dress is perfect on you, exactly as I imagined." "Thank you," Zoe said sincerely. "For everything. I can't tell you how much it meant to me." "The pleasure was entirely mine," Carol assured her. Tom Bradford shook Zoe's hand next. "Congratulations on the young artist spot. It's well deserved." The committee was unanimous. "We've never seen such agreement before." "Thank you for the opportunity," Zoe replied. "I'll make the most of it." This left only Reed. There was a moment of awkwardness before he cleared his throat. "Ms. Williams, Zoe, your performance tonight was exceptional. I consider myself privileged to have heard you play. Thank you, Mr. Reed, she said. And thank you for your contribution to the scholarship. That was unexpected. A flicker of what might have been embarrassment crossed his face. Let's call it my attempt at making amends, though your talent would have been recognized with or without my interference either way. Perhaps, Zoe acknowledged with a small smile, but I might still be waiting tables a lot longer without your challenge. Reed actually laughed at that, a genuine sound quite different from the boisterous, forced laughter she remembered from the restaurant. Life takes us on strange journeys sometimes. Yes, Zoe agreed, looking around at the elegant ballroom, the distinguished guests, the magnificent piano still waiting on stage, all so far from the life she had known just weeks ago. Yes, it certainly does. Later that night, after the last congratulations had been offered and the final business cards exchanged with promises of future collaborations, Zoe stood alone on the empty stage. The cleaning staff worked quietly at the back of the ballroom, clearing away the remnants of the gala. Her flowers and sheet music lay carefully packed in a box beside the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound, just feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. These keys had carried her music to an audience that could change her life. This stage had shown her a glimpse of the future she had worked so hard toward, and it had all begun with a rude customer and a moment of defiance at Blue Water Lounge. Zoe smiled to herself as she gathered her things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, preparations for the Young Artists program, final exams at the conservatory, a proper goodbye to her restaurant colleagues. But tonight, in this quiet moment between what had been and what would be, she allowed herself to simply feel grateful for the music that had always been her true voice, for the teachers who had nurtured her talent, for the unlikely opportunity that had come from standing up for herself, even in a strange way for Harrison Reed, whose rudeness had inadvertently opened a door she might have spent years knocking on. As she left the ballroom, Zoe's mind was already filling with music, not the pieces she had played tonight, but new possibilities, new challenges, new heights to reach for. The journey was just beginning, and she was ready.